We're going to make a new drawing, and the first thing we're going to do is update our table of contents. Number 2, anatomical, planes, and directions. And then we're going to put our number at the top corner of our page. So I've started 2 drawings. One that has a little bit more detailed pictures, and one that has kind of like stick figure pictures. It doesn't matter which one you're going to do, but put your number 2 at the top corner. All right. So to get started, you need one of these. So my first version, the one I'm going to draw on, has 3 people standing on the page. They don't take up all the room, but they're pretty big. And the first one is facing forward, the middle one is facing to the side, and the third one is facing forward. Same thing with my stick figure people. So you can pause the screen and go ahead and get your page set up so it looks like that, one or the other. Okay. Once you've got your drawings, the first thing we're going to do is cut them. So anatomical planes refers to basically different ways that you could cut a body with either a real cut, like into section, or an imaginary line drawn through them. So we're going to start on the left side of our picture with a line that goes straight up and down through the middle. Okay. And this is called the sagittal plane. I'm just going to kind of use this to color code what's what. Okay, so the sagittal plane cuts body into right and left sections. So you can imagine like taking a line right through the nose, right down through the backbone, and cutting in between the legs. It doesn't have to be right in the middle. It could be like shifted off towards one side or the other. But the same idea, it's still going to leave you a right piece and a left piece. All right. The next way that we can cut a body, our next plane, has 2 names. But in our picture here, it's going to still just be a vertical line. And this is called the frontal or coronal plane. And this cuts the body into, so now we've got everything on the front of his body and everything on the back of his body. So it cuts the body into front and back sections. Okay. And then the third way that we can cut a body into pieces is to go across. So for this one, it's going to go right like this. So it doesn't have to be right in half. Like it would still count as this type of plane if we go across the shoulders or we cut across the knees. But the point of this one is it gives you a top and a bottom section. And this one also has 2 names. The name I normally use for this is the transverse plane, but you can sometimes also see it called the horizontal plane. And this cuts the body into top and bottom sections. So in terms of like how to keep straight what it is, frontal kind of tells you in the name, front and back. The word corona in Spanish means a crown. So you can imagine somebody putting on like a crown that's, well, a crown that's like a tiara. That's kind of almost like a headband that goes from ear to ear across the top of their head. And that would put you kind of on a guide to cut a frontal plane. And then the transverse, trans, that root means across, and horizontal in math means across like that as well. So those are some good clues right there in the words. So those are our 3 planes, anatomical planes, or ways to cut a body. The other thing that we're going to add to this sheet is anatomical directions. So anatomists and scientists, medical professionals, when they're talking about locations on the body, they use really specific vocabulary. And they might say, like, the person has a wound on her right arm, lateral side, posterior to the wrist, and distal to the elbow. And once you know those terms, it gives you a really good sense of where they're talking about. So we're going to add directions to our picture here. All right, so on the sagittal plane, if something is close to the center of the body, like going towards this middle area, we'd say it was medial. Medial. That means close to the midline, or close to the middle of the body. So, for example, the center of your rib cage is in a medial position compared to your shoulder. It's closer to the midline. But there's another word that goes with that. If it's kind of towards the sides of the body, so farther away from the midline, the word is lateral. Farther from the midline. Another way to think of that is that it's like towards the sides of the body. So if the center of your rib cage, there's like a bone right here, if that bone is medial, then the rest of the ribs and the shoulder and the arm would all be lateral. They're farther away from the midline or towards the sides of the body. So, and then, yeah, so that's that for that one. On our next picture, with our frontal or coronal plane that cuts the body into front and back sections, we're going to add 2 words here. So if it is towards the front of the body, the word anatomists use is anterior. Which means towards the front. For example, your belly button is on the anterior part of your body. This is also a word in Spanish, or you can think of like antes de, it comes first if it's anterior. Like if you're walking through a door, anterior comes first, antes de, the rest of your body. And then going with that, the opposite one would be posterior. Let's see if I can fit it. Posterior. And as you might guess, that one means towards the back. Okay. And there are two other words that mean the same thing. You might be like, these anatomists, why can't they just pick one? But so anterior means towards the front of the body. The other word for that is ventral, which means also towards the front or towards the belly. So in Spanish, the word vientre is the belly. So the ventral part of the body is the belly side, towards the front. And the back side of the body, the other word for that is dorsal, D-O-R-S-A-L. And when I think of that, I think of a shark's dorsal fin, which is on the back of the shark. So dorsal, back, ventral, towards the front or towards the belly, el vientre in Spanish, and posterior and anterior. Those words all go with this picture for our frontal or coronal plane. Okay. Our last anatomical directions on this picture go with the transverse or horizontal plane that cuts into top and bottom. So there are a couple words to add. So if it's higher up, anatomists use the term superior. We use this in English too. Like if there was a superior team, maybe they played better, so they were on a higher standard. And going with that, is the opposite word, inferior, which means lower down on the body. So for example, your shoulders are more superior, your hips are more inferior. Or your nose is more superior and your fingertips are more inferior. Okay. But again, anatomists can't make up their minds, and they have another word that means something really similar. So we'll add that. So if you go towards the head of the body, which usually means the same as superior, the word anatomists use is cranial, towards the head. And it has the word like cranium, which is like your skull. So going towards the head, cranial. And then, let's see. The last one, this word is caudal, C-A-U-D-A-L, caudal. And caudal means towards the tail in Latin. So it doesn't work for like the legs, because you can't, like if you were down at your ankles, you wouldn't say you're like towards the tail. But it works for like the upper part of your body, because your tailbone's down like at the like bottom of your butt. So anything in this like top section of your body, if you're getting lower down, you could say, like I have a, let's say someone has like a scratch on their butt. You would say, oh, the scratch is more caudal than their shoulder blades, because it's towards the tailbone or closer to the tailbone. Okay. So The last couple terms we're going to add here are not going to be on these pictures. We're just going to draw, let's see, we'll draw like one more stick figure down at the bottom. It's not going to be cut on a plane. It's just going to be one more body. You could also put this on the back. Either way would work. All right. So when you're talking about the arms and legs, people like medical professionals, when they want to talk about the position of something on the arm or the leg, they might say, well, is it like closer to the shoulder or closer to the wrist? And they have a particular vocabulary word for those ideas. So for arms and legs, again, this word only works for your limbs. There's a word that means closer to the shoulder or hip. The word is proximal. Closer to, it's closer to like where it attaches to the rest of the body. So I'm writing closer to attachment point, shoulder or hip. So for example, your elbow is more proximal than your wrist because your elbow is getting closer in towards your shoulder. And your knee is more proximal than your ankle. Again, more close to the hip. And then there's an opposite word, of course. And this word is distal. Like think distant. So this is farther from attachment point. Okay, so as you move down the arm towards your wrists or down the leg towards your ankles and toes, you're moving more distal, farther away. Okay. And then the very last one. Okay, let's just draw like a head, a simple head. All right, and imagine we're like going inside the head. Like if you could drill a hole going inside in some sort of brain surgery. So if we are making a nice hole going in, the direction for that is deep, and we know this word. If you're going deep, you're talking about something that's farther from the surface. So it's kind of hard to tell in my picture, but it means it's going inside into the center of the skull. The farther in you go, the deeper you go. Again, familiar word. But the other one, the alternative, is something that's close to the surface. So anywhere on the surface, that word would be superficial. In Spanish, superficie, that's like the surface. So if somebody, you might hear people being talked about as being like shallow, like, oh, that she's so shallow or he's so shallow. It means they only care about like what's on the surface. And another word people sometimes say is that person's really superficial. They only care about the surface level, not about what's inside somebody. All right, and that's it for our anatomical planes, the 3 ways to cut the body, and anatomical directions. It might seem like a lot of vocabulary, but with practice, you'll start to talk like an anatomist too.